Would you like to feel more motivated to get things done? Then stick around for a few minutes so I can show you a couple tricks to help you do just that. My name's Chris Swift from White Rabbit Hypnosis, whiterabbithypnosis.com, and this is video 4 in the Jailbreaking Yourself video series, and the second video dealing with the topic of motivation. In the last video, we talked about the Mel Robbins 5-second rule and how that plays out. And in this video, we're talking about the topics of scale and what's often called chunk size in hypnosis and NLP related things. So let's start with scale, and I hope you'll forgive me for telling an overtold story. I'll try to keep it brief. It goes like this. A wanderer is wandering through something of a construction site and walks up to a person they encounter on the construction site and asks that person, "What are you doing?" And the person's slapping mortar on a brick, and they say, "I'm slapping mortar on a brick." And so this wanderer wanders on to the next person. That person's laying some bricks in a wall, and they ask that person, "Well, what are you doing?" And that person says, "I'm building a wall." And finally, the wanderer wanders on to a third person who's doing similar kind of work, but has this smile on their face. And they ask that person, "Well, what are you doing?" And that person says, "I'm building a cathedral." And so this story is often used to talk about why we should have big goals, how it's easy to get bored with small goals, and we should go for these big goals to get us excited. And there's some truth in that. It's also true that boredom and panic, terror, exist on the same kind of spectrum. And so there's something of a sweet spot. I want you to think about something that you've been putting off, something that you could take action on, but for whatever reason, you haven't. And I'd like you to think about that thing and consider the idea of what kind of scale you're thinking of it as. There's a difference between picking up bottles on a site and picking up litter on a site and saving the world. They could both be on that same spectrum, but one is possibly a small action and one seems like this huge quest. And so I want you to notice how you feel about that thing. Sometimes it's not that the goal is too small. Sometimes it's that the goal is too big and it makes you freak out or causes some sense of panic. Maybe you're thinking of the goal in too big a way. And if you find yourself bored with it, maybe you're thinking of it in too small a way. And so this idea of scale and how it influences the way we feel about something, and therefore what we do about that thing, is one to know, one to have in your pocket, so to speak, when you're approaching whatever it is you're trying to get done in your life. And so that's the basic idea of scale. There's more to be said about it, but we're not going to say it today because this is aimed to be a short video. The second one deals with the idea of chunk size, and it's related. It also deals with this idea of a spectrum upon which you can look at things. So let's talk about the idea, very briefly, of planning a wedding. Now, planning a wedding is not what you would call an actionable task if you look at the David Allen getting things done kind of approach. Can you just have a wedding? Or does it involve a lot of little steps? Each of those steps you can take action on, but doing that big thing is hard to take action on. So for instance, if you're planning a wedding, that's probably going to involve things like looking at caterers, getting quotes from those caterers and deciding which one you're going to go with, or looking at the kinds of clothes you're going to wear for a wedding. If there's a dress or some kind of a suit, you may look at several of those. Find out which one suits you best. Assess based on price and other criteria. These are all little tiny things that fit in the big project of planning a wedding, of throwing a wedding. And actually, all those little things are not necessarily actionable by themselves either. The idea of choosing a caterer is an actionable step if you've already looked at a few, gotten some quotes, gotten feedback from your partner or whoever else might be involved in the decision-making process. So choosing a caterer at that point is an actionable step. So this idea of how many steps are involved in a process is directly related to how motivated you're going to feel about that process. So if you're paying off a $40,000 debt, there are two ends of that spectrum. One would be to just pay the $40,000 because for some reason you have that $40,000 just to throw at the debt, and you also have that debt. At the other extreme would be paying it in the smallest increment possible, $1 at a time. And you might even add other steps to that. You shouldn't, but you could write down every serial number of every bill or every check number or other antiquated approaches to paying these things off. The idea here is that you could have all these tiny little steps, or you could have this one big step. One big step might seem intimidating, might cause you to panic a bit. All these small steps might feel like you're never going to get it done. If you have to do all these tiny steps in this infinite list of steps, how the heck are you ever going to get to the end of it all? So that's the idea of how the number of steps you put between where you are and where you want to be is one of these things that you can adjust how you're looking at that. Maybe you have too many steps between where you are now and where you want to be, and you have to sort of raise those all up a level. So maybe you have to break it into little projects. Are you trying to start a gym habit? So that's going to involve looking at a couple gyms, but don't put too many steps in between. How many? Look at 3 gyms. Get some reviews on some athletic gear or the kinds of things you might need to begin that gym habit. But don't put too many steps between here and where you're going, or you're never going to feel like you're going to get there. On the same note, don't just say, lose a zillion pounds as your goal. Break it down, because that's going to seem like too big of a task and it's not immediately actionable. How do you do that? That involves doing smaller things. So for most of us that would be watching this video, tying a shoe is something you probably just do unconsciously. But at one point that involved lots of steps. And so at various points in your progress, as you go from where you are to your grand goal of wherever you want to be in your life, there are going to be certain things that you internalize and automate and get good at, that you install habits and things like that make the entire process easier. But if you haven't installed those yet, they may involve smaller steps. So it's something to consider when it comes to how you feel about your goal. Do you have 1,000,000 steps in between here and where you want to be? Or are you just stating the goal as in that's a thing, get a house, start a business? These are projects, they're not actions. You need to break those down into steps, then they become actionable. But if you break them down into too many steps, you might not feel like you're ever going to get there. And since the world of taking action, the process of taking action, is really sort of supported or hindered by how you feel about those things, these are some things worth considering. So I hope these ideas have been useful. If you have any questions on these or any feedback, if you think these are silly ideas, put it in the comments. Let me know. I want these to be useful for you, to help you get to the world of doing mighty deeds and getting stuff done, living the kind of life you want to live without the hindrances that might have been there otherwise. If you like this kind of thing, stop by whiterabbithypnosis.com so you can pick up a few more tips and tricks for your adventure. Be seeing you.